This case centers on a teenager who appeared, by all outward measures, to be living a stable and privileged life. 17-year-old Nikita Kasap lived in a large suburban home in Wisconsin with his mother, Tatiana, and his stepfather, Donald Mayer. He was a high-performing student, well-liked by teachers, involved in school activities, and preparing for college with plans to pursue engineering. There were no obvious warning signs that suggested extreme violence. In February 2025, concern grew when Nikita stopped attending school despite previously having perfect attendance. Family members also reported strange text messages coming from Donald's phone. Police were asked to conduct a welfare check. Inside the home, they discovered Donald and Tatiana had been shot and killed. Their bodies were covered with blankets, indicating deliberate actions taken after death. Nikita was nowhere to be found, marking the beginning of a case that would reveal calculated behavior rather than a moment of impulsive violence. After the killings, Nikita Kasap did not immediately flee. Instead, evidence shows he remained inside the home with his parents' bodies for nearly 2 weeks. This period is critical in understanding the calculated nature of the crime. Investigators found that the bodies were covered and surrounded by candles, which were likely used to mask the smell of decomposition. This suggests planning, emotional detachment, and an effort to maintain control over the environment rather than panic or regret. Digital evidence recovered from a camera and Nikita's phone shows him moving freely around the house during this time. In one recorded moment, he even displayed his stepfather's body during a video call, demonstrating a disturbing lack of remorse. Text messages were sent from his parents' phones to relatives and employers, falsely claiming illness and absence. These actions delayed discovery and bought him time. Rather than seeking help or attempting to hide immediately, Nikita used this period to prepare for escape, reinforcing the conclusion that the murders were intentional and strategically planned. After concealing the crime, Nikita Kasap began a multi-state escape using his stepfather's vehicle. Despite not having a driver's license, he traveled hundreds of miles across several states. During this journey, he discarded his parents' phones in Wyoming, a move that appeared intended to disrupt digital tracking. Phone data later confirmed this was a deliberate attempt to erase his trail rather than a random act. Law enforcement tracked Nikita's phone and eventually located him at a gas station in Kansas, where he was taken into custody without resistance. Inside the vehicle, officers discovered a handgun matching the weapon missing from the family home, along with ammunition, cash, jewelry belonging to his mother, and multiple electronic devices. These items directly linked him to the murders and demonstrated theft following the killings. The presence of a camera containing footage from inside the house further strengthened the case. His calm behavior during arrest contrasted sharply with the brutality of the crime, reinforcing investigators' concerns about his psychological state. When detectives finally questioned Nikita Kasap, his demeanor immediately stood out. Throughout the interrogation, he appeared calm, polite, and emotionally distant. Investigators began with casual conversation about his childhood, school life, and future plans, noting that he spoke openly about college, engineering, and career ambitions as if his life were continuing normally. This contrast between his behavior and the severity of the crime became one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Nikita showed no visible signs of panic or remorse. When detectives shifted toward discussing why he left home and his intentions, he ultimately invoked his right to remain silent and requested an attorney. He then sat alone for hours without emotional reaction. This emotional flatness suggests a strong psychological disconnect between his actions and their consequences. For investigators, this reinforced the belief that the murders were not impulsive but carried out with forethought, emotional control, and a belief that he could still shape his future beyond the crime. As investigators analyzed Nikita Kasap's digital footprint, a disturbing motive began to emerge. Messages found on his phone and encrypted platforms revealed engagement with extremist ideology, including references to the Order of the Nine Angles, a network associated with violent neo-Nazi beliefs. These conversations were not casual. They included discussions about political violence, manifestos, and destabilizing the government. Authorities believe Nikita viewed the murders of his parents as a means to an end. The cash and valuables taken from the home were allegedly intended to fund future attacks, including plans involving weapons and drones. His manifesto explicitly discussed assassinating the president to trigger chaos and accelerate societal collapse. This evidence reframed the case from a domestic homicide to an ideologically motivated act with broader implications. Rather than acting out of personal rage or family conflict, Nikita appeared driven by radical beliefs cultivated online. This digital trail became central in establishing intent, motive, and the extreme danger he posed beyond his immediate family. Facing overwhelming evidence, Nikita Kassup ultimately chose to plead guilty to 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. In court, he acknowledged that he deliberately shot and killed both his mother and stepfather. Unlike his calm demeanor during interrogation, courtroom footage showed visible nervousness, including physical shaking, suggesting a delayed emotional response to the reality of his situation. By pleading guilty, Nikita avoided a lengthy trial, sparing the victims' families further trauma. Prosecutors described the case as one warranting the maximum penalty, emphasizing the calculated nature of the murders, the concealment of bodies, and the extremist motive uncovered through digital evidence. Each charge carries a life sentence, with the possibility, though not a guarantee, of parole eligibility after decades of incarceration. The court also addressed additional consequences, including permanent loss of firearm rights and restrictions tied to violent felony convictions. This chapter marks the transition from investigation to accountability, closing the factual narrative while leaving lasting questions about radicalization, prevention, and the limits of rehabilitation. The Nikita Kassup case stands as a stark example of how extreme violence can emerge behind an appearance of normalcy. Academically successful, socially functional, and outwardly calm, Nikita did not fit common stereotypes associated with violent offenders. Yet his actions revealed a deep ideological radicalization that developed largely online and went unnoticed until it resulted in irreversible harm. This case highlights the role of digital extremist networks in influencing vulnerable individuals and transforming abstract beliefs into real-world violence. It also underscores the limitations of relying solely on external behavior to assess risk. Despite prior contact with federal authorities, the warning signs were fragmented and insufficient to prevent tragedy. Ultimately, the murders were not acts of emotional loss of control but part of a larger, deliberate plan. As the legal process concludes, the lasting impact remains with the victims' families and the community, while the case raises urgent questions about early intervention, online radicalization, and how society identifies and responds to hidden threats before they escalate.